Today, we are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the state of North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and the University of North Carolina. We are seeking a court order declaring HB 2's restroom restriction impermissibly discriminatory, as well as a statewide bar on its enforcement. But this action is about a great deal more than bathrooms. This is about the dignity and the respect that we accord our fellow citizens and the laws that we as a people and as a country have enacted to protect them. And let me speak now directly to the people of the great state, the beautiful state, my home state of North Carolina. You have been told that this law protects vulnerable populations from harm, but that is just not the case. Instead, what this law does is inflict further indignity on a population that has already suffered far more than its fair share. This law provides no benefit to society, and all it does is harm innocent Americans.
All right, so let's look at just who some of those innocent Americans are. We've got some slides here where we're going to take you beyond bathrooms. So first up, what everyone's talking about, North Carolina House Bill 2. It was introduced and passed in exactly one day. Talk about beating that legislative gridlock. It's officially described as an act to provide for single-sex, multiple occupancy bathroom and changing facilities in schools, public agencies, and to create statewide consistency in regulation of employment and public accommodations. It's a lot of words for a lot of mess. Let's go forward and look at the enforcement of the bill. House Bill 2 does not contain any guidance on how it's actually supposed to be enforced, meaning are there going to be monitors outside, some sort of gender check inside? It's completely unclear if bathroom patrons are required to carry some sort of birth certificate or identification card, and some police departments have flat out indicated an unwillingness to devote resources to monitor bathrooms. Moving forward, looking at the federal government and their stance, the Department of Justice, as you just heard their head say, has sued the state of North Carolina over HB 2, the bathroom bill. The Department of Justice determined that the law violated both Title VII and Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. We're going to look at Title IX a little bit now and let you know that it prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis, I'm sorry, that's Title VII. It prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of race, sex, religion, national origin. And also looking at Title IX, looking in the school setting, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities and extends to employment and admissions to institutions that receive federal financial assistance. Now, that federal financial assistance is one of the big linchpins that we're looking at with the executive order from the government versus the state saying, all right, if you're not going to play fair in schools, you're not going to get that federal funding. And we'll definitely get a little bit more into that as we start the A block.
Long before the fight between the feds and North Carolina over bathroom access became front-page news, it's been beyond dispute that when you gotta go, you gotta go. Many of us can relate to that desperate search for a Starbucks, but imagine if that most basic of needs became a political statement, or worse, a humiliating experience. A recent executive order from Mayor de Blasio underscored the right of transgender New Yorkers to use the bathroom or changing area of their choice. Here to help us figure out what that means in the real world are Paolo Lebron-Guzman, an activist in Make the Road, New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
And from the NYC Commission on Human Rights, the special counsel to the commissioner, Dana Sussman. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to BK Live.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so North Carolina is writing bills, the president, the federal government is weighing in. Mayor de Blasio is issuing executive orders. Why has access to bathrooms become such a political football as of late? Paolo?
So thank you for having me. I think that the access to bathrooms, like you said, is such a basic need. I mean, just this entire society has basically gendered bathrooms so specifically and so divisive that essentially you have to choose. You have to choose one or the other, and it's already assigned to you, right? So it's a hard thing to think about when you don't identify with what you've been assigned, to then not be able to actually go to that place and feel safe in that space when it is such a basic bodily need. So I think it's an essential thing that we have to fight for, and it's very basic, like you said. I can't imagine like that having be a restriction for anyone, really.
Yeah. Okay, but even still, I understand the issue. But why, as of late, on a federal level, on a national level, why has this become just a hot topic?
I think it's rooted in fear. I think that looking back at where people were decades ago around sexual orientation and fear around gay men and having access to children and being teachers, it's really the same rhetoric you're hearing now with respect to transgender folks. It's this fear of the unknown and fear of difference, and it's really scary because we're using the same language about sexual predation and all of these things that are not that far behind us when we're thinking about sexual orientation and are actually still present in some parts of the country as well. So I see it as just rooting in fear and an attempt to divide people when they really don't know what the lived experience of trans and gender nonconforming folks are.
Well, Dana, you work for a city government municipal agency. I wonder, to your knowledge, is there any sort of reporting on a number of incidences that may or may not have happened, anything that would prompt people to say, wow, this is the great unheard problem that no one's ever complained about, but we better stop it now?
Right. So New York City has actually had a law protecting people on the basis of gender identity and gender expression since 2002.
Yeah.
So we have not, in that time, in the 14 years since that bill became law, have heard about incidences in New York City in which people have been targeted or harassed by a trans person in a bathroom. Mm-hmm. What we have heard is that going to the bathroom and accessing the bathroom aligned with your gender identity is so vital to trans people because they are more likely to be harassed and intimidated and attacked. So we don't have statistics. There are recent studies to show. There was a report that came out in 2014 with 12 different jurisdictions that had protections for trans and gender nonconforming folks, and no reports of violence in bathrooms perpetrated by trans and gender nonconforming folks. So we really don't have any information to back it up. And I think since HB2 went into effect just a few weeks ago, there's also been no reports, and no reports prior, I believe, also around attacks on people in bathrooms all of a sudden because trans and gender nonconforming folks were using the bathroom aligned with their gender identity.
Well, that might be the greatest sort of discrepancy, because the folks who are most likely to be victimized are the people who we're demonizing with laws like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, right. You couldn't exactly.
Short answer, yeah.
Exactly. I think, it was never a problem. And I think a lot of the advocacy around this has been, transgender and gender nonconforming people have been using the bathroom aligned with their gender identity for a long time in many circumstances, and most people often don't know it. It's not as if we're in the bathroom policing gender. There aren't bouncers outside of bathrooms weighing who can go where. So, these folks have existed in society for decades. This is not a new phenomenon.
More than decades, since long before the flushing toilet.
So how does New York sort of rate with this as compared to North Carolina? You do work with Make the Road in New York, so you're on the ground with people. If we don't have the numbers to sort of back this up, what are sort of people saying?
I think that what Dana was saying about trans and gender nonconforming people have been using the bathroom ever since, and this hasn't come into question. I think that the conversations that we're having now are more to the day-to-day, more because of personal experiences that people are having. It goes back not only just to outside world, public restrooms, but also in schools. And I think that the guidance that was issued now by the Obama administration is really important because it tackles just that point of education at a younger age, of just visibility and understanding that people can choose and will choose their own gender identities. So I think that the experience that I've had is that folks are experiencing, the idea of the challenge of not being able to use the restroom that they identify with at an older level, but also at a younger level. And I think it's really important right now to be having these conversations.
I guess for young people, it might be the first time that they bump into a sort of institutionalized gendering or discrimination, frankly, if they're a kid and their school comes up with some policy. But we've had folks from Make the Road on before to talk about discrimination when it comes to trans and gender nonconforming people in employment and housing and all manner of things. So as an activist there, where do you rank this whole bathroom issue that seems to have gone from 0 to 60 so quickly when there are other very clear and present issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about visibility, really. Like, this has become now a visible issue that folks are talking about. And I think that the point that Dana said that comes with fear, I think it's also a conflation of this sexual orientation and gender and people being able to choose their gender. And I think that's what people are most afraid of the idea that you can choose that gender and then live your life, you know, with that affirming identity throughout. And I think this issue is an example of that, the visibility of that, like something that people have to share, that it's visible, that it's open in the public, a restroom, like a public restroom with multi-stalls. All of a sudden now everybody has to like think of this issue visibly. Right. And I think all the other issues that are, you know, that are affecting gender and trans individuals are more personal, and people are sort of isolated from it, where this is like a public issue. Employment and housing and healthcare, which are the biggest issues, and basically incarceration, which are the biggest issues affecting trans and gender nonconforming people, people can have a separation from them. Gotcha. And they, you know, if they don't see it, if they don't experience it, they don't have to deal with it. They don't have to handle it in any way.
You know, I have to ask, would you say that this sort of brouhaha around this issue may be sort of a backlash to some of the strides that the LGBTQ community has recently achieved, i.e. marriage equality, or?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think so too. But I do think that it's a fact, like I said, of visibility for this one issue. And I think there's all these other things. And yeah, it's like an easy target, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden they can come up with HB2 and say like, no, we you know, we're not going to allow this because the people are afraid, because it threatens community, and that's a good excuse to use it against folks, right?
Well, Dana, speaking of the sort of visual and making it visible, there's been some talk that this is sort of like a red herring. It's a test case to put something out there that people might have a visceral reaction to in order to sort of dismantle a lot of gains that have been made in America socially on that front. So do you give any credence to that? Like, oh, this is an easy sort of one that they snuck in one day's time.
Right, yeah, I do think it is a low-hanging fruit. I think, you know, there's a lot of I think old-fashioned sensibilities around gender bodies. You know, people are uncomfortable. You know, I think with the political discourse around an election year, I think there's a lot of discussion about or fear-mongering around, you know, men preying on little girls. I mean, it's you know, you could put that in any racial. You can racialize that. You can make that about sexual orientation. You can make that about trans and gender non-conforming people. So I think that it is a low-hanging fruit issue. But I think what the strides that cities like New York have made without incident is really significant. And so, you know, as we mentioned before, the law has been around for 14 years. The mayor issued an executive order earlier this year, and the Commission on Human Rights issued legal guidance back in December on gender identity and gender expression discrimination, making it very clear that to deny someone access to a restroom, among many other things, but to deny someone access to a restroom or a single-sex facility is unlawful in the city of New York, in all contexts. To take that
outside of the city of New York, you know, what legal sort of precedents or legal standing would you say that the governor of North Carolina or even the lieutenant governor of Texas have to sort of stand on?
I think what they're saying is that the federal anti-discrimination law, which only protects people in very few categories, so unlike what we have in New York City, that the federal government is expanding the definition of sex in a way that was not intended when the law was passed in 1964. So that sex is about biological sex, about being a man or a woman assigned at birth, and that is it. But actually, federal district courts and appellate courts have said that sex is about not only that, but it's been interpreted to mean sexual orientation now. It's also been interpreted in many courts to be gender identity, not conforming to gender stereotypes. So it's really going to be a battle of what the word sex means. And I don't think in 1964 there was much conversation in the legislative history around exactly what that means. So courts have really, over the decades, put a lot more meat on the bones of what that means, and that's really what this comes down to.
Okay.
Well, in our final minute, I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to share your organizations, or if there's something you'd like to further this discussion. You want to go, Paul?
Yeah, so I mean, Make the Road does a lot of really great work. We have 2 LGBTQ specific groups in the Bushwick, larger Brooklyn area and in Queens. And I think what's interesting about both these groups is the one in Queens really fights for the rights predominantly of the trans Latina community that is based out of there, which I mean, for them, like this is an issue, but like you said, there are other pressing issues that are extremely important that, you know, affect like not only their just quality of life, but basic survival. And our Bushwick group group, what's really interesting about that is that it's intergenerational. And we do a lot of work in the schools and around the neighborhood, so it includes people from all age ranges, just a lot of racial backgrounds and a lot of different experiences. And I think these two groups are really vital in fighting these issues. But yeah, I mean, I think that the bathroom issue is important for visibility, but there are a lot of things, that are basic to a lot of Black and brown, trans and gender nonconforming people that I think are the most important at the moment, like incarceration, like immigration, like housing, like economic opportunities. And I think that's really what we, as groups and as Make the Road, are focusing on more.
It's such a great organization. And Paolo, last comment?
So we at the Commission on Human Rights, we are the city agency charged with enforcing the city's anti-discrimination law, which is one of the broadest in the country, something we're very proud of. So if anyone feels that they've been discriminated against in this context or in any other, in employment, housing, or public accommodations, they should call 311 and ask to speak with the Commission on Human Rights, while we will connect them with someone who can take their information and set up a meeting so we can work with them to eradicate discrimination.
Phenomenal. Happy to have you both here sharing their resources. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you very
it.
much.